In 2015, I established the Christopher G. Moore Foundation in London. The purpose of my foundation is to award an annual literary prize to an author whose book is outstanding in addressing and supporting and provoking a global human rights discussion. The Moore Prize 2021 is in its fifth year. In this video, the three judges talk about the criteria they used in selecting the winning book. Alongside Chief Judge Adrian Loftus-Parkins, two other judges also served with distinction, Debbie Stoddard and Min Boy Jones. Whether you are an author, editor, researcher, or a member of the human rights community, you will be inspired by this creative panel. Hopefully, it will start a community-wide conversation about the important role books play in advancing awareness of what is at stake in the human rights battle. Judging a literary prize is time-consuming and requires diligence, care, and commitment of the judges. I couldn't have asked for a better panel. I'm grateful to Adrian, Debbie, and Min. Thank you. It's now time to turn the screen over to the judges.
Okay, so I was going to start by saying, after rereading, do you have a clear winner? Let me tell you, I actually...
Absolutely.
Damn, and it's probably not mine. And I was going to defer to you because when I reread them all quickly. And what I came up with was I got a different impression of all of them the second time I read them, strangely. I picked up a lot more things. And while, a month ago, I may have had a clear winner, I now have 3 out of the 4 tied. I then sat down and I started giving them scores. I ranked them to between 1 and 4 on 4 different elements. First of all, human rights, because this is a human rights prize and that is the most important thing. Second, on their literary value. How well they're written, how easy they are to read, because in actual fact, what we want to do is have as many people as possible read them. And then global relevance. Are the human rights issues that they're discussing in the book current and globally relevant? And so then I came up with a subtotal, and then I added emotional impact, how much the book actually affected me. And then I came up with a total. And I did that not a couple of weeks ago, a few days ago. And then I went back today after I finished reading them all. And I did it again without looking at the original scores. And I came up with something slightly different. But I'm not going to tell you what my winner is, or my 2 winners are.
That's a terrible tease.
Because being the chair of the panel, I don't think I should unduly influence you. Not that either one of you is particularly influenceable. But I am curious about who you think the clear winner is. Min, do you want to start?
Yes, I like to start. For me, it was a very close race between The Daughter of Kobani and the End of Where We Begin. That was always, those 2 books were my favorite books. And they were both, really well written, excellent pieces of reporting, and in a part of the world that's not easy to report. Especially the end of Where We Begin. You can't just Google information from that part of the world, and I think I appreciate that book a lot more because the narrative structure was just brilliantly executed. But I note what you said as the last criterion about the emotional impact. It didn't have the same emotional impact for me as, say, The Daughter of Kobani. I felt very strongly that was on the human rights scale. The abuse there was just outrageous, and it was very. I felt that very acutely, and I and between those two books, you know, both outstanding books, I felt The Daughter of Kobani came out on those two criteria: emotional impact of human rights abuse that the women of, not just the women of you know, of the Kurdish population or northern Syria and so on, but also all the women in the Middle East, and also part of the Muslim world, and I felt that really came out strongly. I mean, there is a weakness in that book, and which we discussed in our last meeting. That was, it was a particularly American-centric perspective, and you know, but you know, we are who we are, and she's American, and so we can forgive her for that. Clearly, for her, she has she's something of a superstar, a well-known face and voice, and and she wrote with that confidence of being who she is. Whereas the end of Where We Begin, that's clearly that, you know, the author really played the journalist and was as objective as possible, and gave, I thought, a very balanced account. But anyway, in terms of the emotional impact, I felt The Daughter Kabani came out on top for me, and that's my selection.
Thank you. That's really interesting. I won't comment until we hear Debbie's.
Well, you know, it's true. Gail Allen really writes with flourish. But The End of Where We Begin had a lot of heart. For both of those books, the stories really stay with you. Intellectually, I wanted to consider Made in China more because I'm always concerned about supply chains and slavery in the supply chain, and how we ultimately connected directly and indirectly to human rights abuses. So this whole thing of what we choose to do, what we choose to buy can actually affect human rights of others. What's very inspiring about Daughters of Kobani is it really breaks the stereotypes and the expectations that women in situations of war are ultimately victims, especially women in the Middle East. That they are the victims, they are the survivors. But in this case, the fact that they were systematically discriminated against and marginalized actually pushed the characters concerned, the protagonists concerned, to actually do something. And I think for a lot of people who face what appears to be a very intractable human rights situation, who are really under threat, or even people who are on the periphery of that, they feel so frustrated. They say, I wish I could do something. And in this case, they actually did something that was quite unexpected and, you know, unimaginable in so many respects. So that's and the fact that they gained not only the respect of their peers, you know, their male peers, but also the respect of foreign forces is kind of interesting as well. So, you know, even when in the introduction to the book, it's actually the women from the U.S. force, the woman contact from the U.S. force is actually envious of this militia. They're kind of like, wow. So I think, you know, in many respects, human rights is not just about struggling for a victim, but also of self-empowerment and of challenging the norm. And, you know, the story of human rights is always about challenging what is a commonly accepted norm, an oppressive norm. And this is how they did it. And I think, but I'm coming from a headspace, I have to confess, that at the beginning of the coup in February, we were so actively supporting our colleagues on the ground who were really courageously engaged in non-violent protest. But as our friends started to get shot and blown up and tortured, and some of the other young people said, well, this is not working. We're going to have to fight back with whatever we've got, because we're being subjected to airstrikes and snipers. Then you really have to start to think that, fighting back, all of us have the luxury of fighting back non-violently. But when you are faced with an enemy that will commit atrocities against you without any hesitation whatsoever, then you do have to defend yourself and your community. So for me, that's especially in situations where the structures like the UN, for example, are not able or not willing to provide civilian protection. I think this is some of the issues in this. So I know it's unpopular because people say, "Oh, you're promoting armed struggle," and these women were fighting, and it's like, well, I'm a human rights activist. I'm committed to nonviolence, but in a situation, if I can't offer protection and nobody else is willing or able to, then self-defense is a human right. So that's the situation. Of course, we're hoping that those daughters of Kobani didn't actually commit any war crimes.
Debbie, what was your second choice?
The end of where we began, the South Sudan story.
Okay.
But if you were going to talk about violence and human rights, don't forget that Eat the Buddha had a lot of violence in it. Yeah. Not just the violence of the state, the Beijing state, but also that how they were self-immolating, and then they were actually talking about drinking the petrol to make sure that they actually died and they couldn't be rescued and instrumentalized by the state. So that's why Dalai Lama was talking about this violence to the self. So we look at in all of these books, there's some type of violence. Made in China is about structural violence and torture by the state. But it's really sad when you realize that there's no happy ending, because the guy who actually wrote the letter, he can escape, but he dies in exile in Indonesia. So the end of Where We Begin was frustrating because she writes it just as COVID hits, and basically all the great work that some of the women were doing was suspended, and they were like in limbo when the book ends. And you feel worried. You leave feeling both inspired that woman found her son. Remember, her son was separated from her.
Yes.
She found her son, but then what's next? You feel both. There was that huge suspense about, is this really her son? He's gone. She's still nurturing hope. She's not going to get him back. Oh my God, she got him back. But that whole thing of it ends with this cloud of uncertainty because of COVID, and you've been moved, but you also leave worried about what's going to happen to them. Because
the title of the book is The End of Where We Begin is suggests that it is an episode of a life, and it tells of a particular segment, a particular episode of this, and I quite like the way that she does give you that update at the end that life had been interrupted by COVID, and she didn't smooth over that this is just they've come to they've found each other. This is the end of that first chapter. Chapter 2 begins ... with, and who knows where that is, that would lead to. but one thing that, you know, I think I said this in our previous chat about Eat the Buddha and also Made in China, that I think with Eat the Buddha, sorry, the story about the annexation of Tibet, and also the violence that has been unleashed on the people there is well known. It's not a new story, and therefore I was hoping that when she started the story, which was excellently started, it started really well, and I was hoping to get to really been taken learn more about that history through the eyes of one or two people, which it promised that it would deliver, but it didn't really deliver. The middle part and the third section, I felt were quite weak, and I think we mentioned this before. I felt like she was padding it up a bit, and Made in China. Whilst I agree with you, Debbie, and also Adrian, you mentioned this before. It is an important story about what is actually happening now and continues to happen in such a the scale of it is rather breathtaking. We've never have heard of such a story since the end of the Second World War. And however, I wasn't convinced by the reporting. I thought there were a lot of gaps there, and so and that's why those two books didn't make it to my top two.
I think just to address a couple of things, Debbie, you talk about violence. All of the books really have violence at their heart, and I think that we can't avoid that. We can't say we're not going to choose a book because it's too violent, because I think, and you know better than I do, really at the heart of most human rights abuses is some sort of violence. So I don't think we can discount any books based on whether they're violent or not violent, or how violent they are. My whole approach changed, or my whole attitude towards the books changed as I went along. The first time I read Daughters of Kobani, I thought, well, you know, oh, hang on. Okay,
it includes unlimited
I just got a gift from Zoom of extra time.
Yes, I told you. I told you.
Yeah. So the first time I read it, I thought, oh, you know, it's not as much about human rights as about, you know, the battles, and then listening to your comments the last time, reading it a second time, and it was the first book I read a second time. I thought, oh yeah, no, this is very good. This is I want this one to win. And I felt after I had read it, I moved on next to Made in China, and I realized that actually one of the Daughters of Kobani was one of the most nicely written of the four books. If not the most nicely written, because when I went on to read the others, just the way they were written was a disappointment compared to the beauty of the writing in the Daughters of Kobani. But you know, as I went through, I still felt as though I wanted one of the books that focused on China to win, because I think in terms of relevance, global relevance, they are the strongest. But when I sat down after I'd done everything, read all the books, when I did my little chart with scores, they didn't come up on top. They were down considerably, particularly in emotional impact. They were the lowest in terms of emotional impact. Intellectually, I really wanted to push the idea of human rights in China and what she has done and what she is doing as a virtually a dictator in China and how it affects the rest of us. But I didn't think they were as good. And
No.
so the two that I came up with in the end, as the ones that I gave the most points to, were well, actually, I had two different methods of scoring. So one method of scoring had The End of Where We Begin as the winner, and Eat the Buddha as the second one. And the second method of scoring, this is all very technical, really.
Yes.
The End of Where We Begin was the winner, and Made in China was this number two. I think the reason Daughters of Kobani dropped down for me, despite the fact that I thought it was a very good book, and I agree with everything Debbie is saying, and Min, what you're saying about it, is that the human rights issues were not as current as the other three books. They're not over, but they're not as compelling, as globally relevant. Maybe they are as globally relevant, but they're the only, the Daughters of Kobani is the only one of the four books that isn't clearly addressing ongoing human rights issues. So that's why that one dropped down considerably for me. So I think what we do agree on, you both have The End of Where We Begin as your second choice.
Yeah.
That, as it turns out, is my first choice.
It's basically Kobani and End of Where We Begin is equal first with me for different reasons. And what was attractive is Kobani was better. The writing was better, but Min actually talks about the structure of End of Where We Begin as the structure. The book is structured better, but the writing is not as great as Daughters of Kobani.
Although it's not.
But you're right. No, it's not badly written.
I would be happy with either one, to be honest. But if I did have to, vote for one, I would fall for Daughter of Kobani. Yes.
But there's also the other part of me that if you look at these two books, there's a little bit of fighting for the underdog. And in this picture, in terms of the publicity machine, End of Where We Begin is the underdog. It's actually a less publicized book. And the book prize can at least give it a little bit more of a profile, whereas Daughters of Kobani has actually been very well highlighted in mainstream media. And if you do a Google of the two books, Daughters of Kobani plus, the author's name is 19,300 hits, whereas End of Where We Begin by Rosalind Russell is only 2,780 hits. And it's there's a huge gap in terms of two books in our minds, which are of equal value, not getting not that imbalance in attention and publicity means that there's one part of me that's saying, okay, let's go for End of Where We Begin, because the prize also will be able to promote the book a little bit more. So that's one of the other ways of thinking.
Okay, the prize, you can say, okay, great, the prize will help End of Where We Begin get some publicity and some notice. Conversely, let's look at it the other way. The more prize doesn't have as much publicity or as much, no one knows about it, or rather not many people know about it yet. And so one of the things that I'd like to do is make sure that the more prize gets publicity and gets better known and more internationally known. So maybe if we choose a book that has had more publicity, that'll help the prize. So are we now? Bear in mind, I'm being devil's advocate here. What do you think? Do you think we need to choose a book that the prize can help, or that can help the prize?
That will undermine the integrity of the prize if we just, chose the publicity path, which I don't think all of us would be happy with that if that's the case. I think the strength of any enterprise would be in your integrity, and that will come through later on through the years of the Moore Prize. You'll be a worthy winner if you were chosen, because you were chosen by not for publicity reason, but for the merits of the book.
I think if we were going to choose a book that I think the book that got the most publicity out of these four was Eat the Buddha. I think that's an incredibly well-known book.
Yeah, that's true.
But I really think.
But because they want,
yeah.
I was going to say too, forgot to add, because some of these books have so many other prizes attached to them anyway. So in some ways, another prize won't make any difference. If, say, they won the Whitbread, and that's going to be emblazoned on the cover, not the Moore Prize. In fact, they probably won't run out of room to mention the Moore Prize.
I think the most important thing with the Moore Prize is to choose a winner that we think is the strongest in terms of human rights and emotional impact. I think those are the two strongest things. And as Christopher said, it also has to be well written. It doesn't have to be the most well written of the four books, but it has to be well written. It has to be readable, but mainly it has to have a very strong human rights background, and it needs to have emotional impact in order to grab people and convince them that this is a big human rights issue and they should take an interest.
I think in that respect, the Moore Prize will make more impact on End of Where We Begin as a book. We make more of a difference than it would on Daughters of Kobani. As to echo what Min is saying, if you won't even they won't even have place on the book jacket to include the Moore Prize. But the other thing too, the Moore Prize is essentially a way of the niche that the Moore Book Prize occupies is we focus on human rights. But in focusing on human rights, we are saying, hey, here is this neat little book telling a huge, amazing story that you really need to read, that you would not normally encounter if you were going to a literary launch or whatever. This is a hidden golden nugget of good writing focused on human rights issue that you really need to read. This is basically the niche, the branding of the Moore Prize.
Yeah.
There's no question that the two books that we've chosen, The Daughter of Kobani and The End of Where We Begin, are really well-written books. They're outstanding books, really. And they're written the style is very different. Both books are rendered quite differently. I do think in many ways the End of Where We Begin is outstanding in all those boxes that you articulated, Adrian, in terms of human rights, in terms of emotional impact, in terms of the other 2 points you made. I think it ticked those boxes really well. And I think importantly in terms of the emotional impact, it's a story which I think, a general reader can follow right to the end and be moved by it sufficiently to go and find out more about what's happening in the south of Sudan and discover what's happening there. And I think that's a really important thing that the author Rosalind Russell has done, as she's made us interested in a part of the world that we normally wouldn't pay any attention to. And I think that's the important point. And I think picking her as a winner, that book as a winner, I think we also help her in achieving her objective, in bringing that out of the world onto our reading, our thinking, our imagination, and I think it's a really worthy project she's done.
So do we have a winner?
We do.
I
We
think
do,
it's
and I must say that I really appreciate the work of the team in vetting all the applications, all the submissions, and giving us a sound range of shortlisted books to consider.
I think we had an incredibly strong shortlist. I've judged this prize before, and I've judged other prizes, and usually it comes down to one or two, but I have to say the four of these, any one of them could be a winner, and I think every one of them would have done the prize proud, and vice versa. And I have to thank the rest of the jury, Debbie and Min, because I think your input has been stellar. I mean, you've had so much interesting insight into all of these books, things that I hadn't thought of, and you've both expressed them really brilliantly. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And it's been a pleasure and an honor to work with you and Min.
It has been a pleasure. And I think this prize, more than any other one that I've been involved with, I think this prize is, I don't know what the word is. I think it's a really important prize, and I'd like to see more people know about it. And I'd like to see more books from all over the world come to it. And, it makes the job of the judges harder, but I think it's so important as a prize.